Beneath the ancient oak trees of St. Michael's Cemetery in Charleston, South Carolina, rest 9 graves the city's most influential families refused to ever speak about. Each headstone carries the name of a wealthy plantation owner who died between 1851 and 1855, all under eerily similar conditions. Sudden paralysis, followed by what doctors of that era described as a peaceful death. Yet in 1923, when renovations began at the cemetery, groundskeepers uncovered something so disturbing that city officials ordered it sealed from public records at once. Inside all 9 coffins, the wooden lids were scarred with deep fingernail scratches, and the bodies were twisted into positions that revealed frantic, desperate struggles. What officials uncovered next would trouble Charleston's elite for generations. Buried beneath the cemetery's oldest magnolia tree was a leather-bound journal written in the precise, careful handwriting of a man named Solomon Fairfax. Its pages detailed 4 years of calculated vengeance that began with a family's screams and ended with 9 powerful men buried alive. Before we continue the story of Solomon Fairfax and the hidden truth that turned a gentle healer into Charleston's most deliberate killer, we ask you to become part of our community of truth seekers. Tap the subscribe button, ring the notification bell so you never miss these forgotten stories from America's past, and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from, because we love hearing from across the country. The journal's first entry, dated March 15, 1851, opened with a single sentence that explained everything. "Today I watched my wife and children burn, and I did nothing to stop it." Charleston in the 1850s stood as the shining jewel of Southern aristocracy, where white-columned mansions lined the Cooper River, and fortunes built on rice and cotton created dynasties who believed themselves untouchable. The city's medical community, though small, held enormous authority among the wealthy elite, who could afford private physicians for their growing list of ailments, mysterious fevers, sudden weakness, and strange paralytic conditions that seemed to afflict Charleston's most prominent families with alarming frequency. Dr. Cornelius Hathaway established his practice on Meeting Street in 1845, quickly gaining a reputation among Charleston's upper class for innovative treatments and an unusual knowledge of rare remedies. Much of his success came from his exceptional assistant, a slave named Solomon Fairfax, who possessed an almost uncanny understanding of medicinal plants and chemical compounds. Solomon had been purchased specifically for the practice after demonstrating extraordinary talent in botanical medicine skills passed down through generations of healers in his family who had served plantations throughout the Carolina Low Country. Solomon Fairfax was not the typical field slave common to Charleston plantations. He stood tall with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb every detail around him. He had been educated alongside the children of his previous master, learning to read and write before such instruction was forbidden. His familiarity with Latin medical terms impressed even Dr. Hathaway, who soon depended on Solomon to prepare complex compounds and assist in delicate procedures. Wealthy patients grew comfortable with Solomon's presence, often requesting him for his gentle manner and intuitive grasp of their suffering. For 32 years before coming to Dr. Hathaway, Solomon lived on the Pemberton plantation 15 miles outside Charleston, where he married a woman named Celia and raised 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter in the slave quarters. The Peton family allowed this arrangement because Solomon's healing skills proved invaluable during outbreaks of disease that could devastate a plantation overnight. His treatments saved countless lives, slave and free, earning him a rare degree of respect. He treated snakebite's consumption fevers using African remedies taught by his grandmother alongside techniques learned by observing white physicians. The Petons even trusted him with their own family's care during illness. That fragile stability ended abruptly in March 1851, when Edmund Peton's gambling debts forced him to sell portions of his human property. The sale included Solomon's wife and children, who would be separated and sent to different plantations across the state. Solomon begged Peyton, offering years of unpaid labor, suggesting alternate arrangements, anything to keep his family together. But Peyton, facing relentless creditors, refused. The sale was set for March 14, 1851, at the Charleston slave market, and nothing would alter it. The morning arrived gray and heavy, with humidity storm clouds gathering over the Ashley River, as though nature itself sensed the tragedy ahead. Solomon spent the night holding his family, memorizing their faces, and breathing, knowing sunrise meant permanent loss. Celia remained composed, focusing on preparing their children. 8-year-old Marcus inherited Solomon's intelligence. 6-year-old Samuel shared his gentle nature, often helping gather medicinal plants. 4-year-old Grace clung to her mother, sensing terror she could not understand. As traders arrived, Solomon watched helplessly as his family was loaded into a wagon, with others being torn apart by Peyton's desperation. Tears mixed with promises everyone knew were lies meant to soften unbearable pain. The true horror began on the road. A wagon wheel struck a rut, tipping the vehicle, and Celia fell, striking her head on a jagged stone. Blood flowed as Solomon struggled against shackles to reach her. The traders declared her a loss and ordered the wagon onward, leaving her unconscious by the roadside. Solomon screamed, fought, but was restrained by others, knowing resistance meant punishment for all. At the slave market, Solomon was forced to watch as his children were sold separately. Marcus went to a rice planter from Georgetown, Samuel, to a brutal cotton farmer from the upcountry, Grace, to a Savannah household, disappearing into bondage forever. Solomon showed no outward resistance, knowing it would worsen his fate, but inside something shattered. A man devoted to healing watched everything he loved destroyed by men who treated human lives as assets. Dr. Hathaway, unaware of the full tragedy, purchased Solomon for his medical skill, paying a premium. As Solomon left the market, he looked back once, knowing in that moment something cold settled in his heart, a patience that would allow him to wait, learn, and one day repay every man responsible. That night, alone in a small room above the practice, Solomon began writing in a leather journal hidden through his ordeal. His first entry, written by candlelight, read, "Today I watched my wife and children burn, and I did nothing to stop it, but I am still alive, and I remember every face, every name, every laugh as my world ended. They think I am broken, but they have taught me patience." The months that followed passed in routine and quiet observation. Solomon worked diligently while secretly studying Charleston's elite and medical circles. Dr. Hathaway, a widower in his 50s, relied increasingly on Solomon's steady hands and deep knowledge. Gradually, Solomon gained independent responsibility and patient trust. He researched every wealthy family, learning who profited from the slave trade. 9 men were directly linked to his family's destruction. In Dr. Hathaway's library, Solomon studied advanced chemistry, discovering a South American plant toxin capable of causing complete paralysis while leaving consciousness intact. Cultivated locally by a Charleston botanist, the compound could mimic death. Through experimentation, Solomon perfected the dosage, ensuring victims would be buried alive, fully aware. His first target was Colonel Reginald Fitzpatrick, a rice planter who mocked enslaved children at the auction. Fitzpatrick's gout treatments provided opportunity and cover. On December 15, 1852, Solomon administered the compound. As paralysis took hold, Solomon calmly told Fitzpatrick the truth, explaining exactly what awaited him: burial alive, conscious, until death came hours later. When Dr. Hathaway arrived, Fitzpatrick appeared dead, heart failure the obvious cause. Solomon attended the funeral, watching dirt strike the coffin, knowing justice had begun. That night, he wrote, "Colonel Fitzpatrick has paid 8, remain. Justice is patient but certain." Charleston never questioned the death, and Solomon's reputation only grew as the long, calculated wait for the next victim began. The medical assistant's reputation remained completely untarnished. The flawless execution of his first act of revenge gave Solomon the confidence to move forward with the next stage of his plan. At the same time, it forced him to confront the mental cost of what he had begun. Even with years of preparation and absolute certainty in the righteousness of his cause, witnessing a man die in pure terror affected him more deeply than he had anticipated. For weeks afterward, he could not sleep, not from remorse, but from relentlessly imagining what Fitzpatrick must have endured during those final hours beneath the soil. Choosing the second victim required extreme care in both timing and approach. Solomon understood that any visible pattern could eventually draw suspicion, so the intervals between deaths and their apparent causes had to vary. His research pointed him toward Judge Marcus Calverton as the ideal next target. Calverton had not only been present at the sale of Solomon's family, but had also provided legal justification for separating enslaved families, arguing publicly that such practices were necessary to maintain order and maximize economic efficiency. Judge Calverton suffered from severe migraines that had worsened steadily over the past 2 years, forcing him to seek treatment from Dr. Hathaway with increasing frequency. The condition offered Solomon both access and cover. Migraine sufferers were known to occasionally die from strokes, and Calverton's age made such an event medically believable. Before Solomon could act, however, an unexpected complication nearly dismantled his entire campaign. In March of 1853, Dr. Hathaway announced that he was considering taking on a junior partner, a young physician named Dr. Timothy Henderson, who had recently completed his medical training in Philadelphia. Henderson was eager to establish himself in Charleston's competitive medical world. His arrival would mean increased scrutiny of Solomon's work, more witnesses to patient interactions, and far fewer opportunities to administer the paralytic compound unnoticed. Even more troubling was Henderson's exposure to the latest advances in forensic medicine, including emerging methods for detecting unusual substances in deceased patients. Solomon realized his timeline would have to be dramatically shortened. Instead of spreading the deaths over years, he would need to complete his mission within months before Henderson's presence made further action impossible. This acceleration demanded greater risks and acceptance of less than ideal conditions. The pressure to move quickly led to Solomon's first serious error. While preparing Judge Calverton's treatment in April of 1853, he used a slightly higher dose of the compound than intended. The judge's apparent death came faster than planned, and the paralysis was so intense that even Dr. Hathaway noticed something unusual. "Strange," Dr. Hathaway muttered while examining the body. "The rigidity is more severe than I would expect from a stroke. And his eyes, there's something almost desperate in their expression." Solomon's pulse raced as he watched the doctor conduct a far more detailed examination than he had performed on Fitzpatrick. For several agonizing minutes, Solomon feared his entire plan had unraveled, but Dr. Hathaway's training, though advanced for the era, lacked the knowledge required to recognize the effects of Solomon's rare toxin. After nearly 15 minutes, he concluded that the abnormalities were simply the result of an unusually severe stroke. "Poor man must have suffered terribly at the end," Dr. Hathaway said, unknowingly describing exactly what Calverton was experiencing at that very moment, conscious and paralyzed as his body was prepared for burial. Judge Calverton's funeral drew even larger crowds than Fitzpatrick's, fitting for a man who had shaped Charleston's legal system for over 3 decades. Solomon watched from the section reserved for slaves as the coffin was lowered into St. Michael's Cemetery, just 3 rows from Fitzpatrick's grave. As the service ended, Solomon noticed something that sent a cold shock through him. A young man stood near the back of the crowd, quietly recording observations in a small leather notebook. He was Thomas Grimby, a journalist for the Charleston Mercury, who had begun investigating what he privately called the prominent deaths phenomenon, a series of sudden fatalities among Charleston's elite that seemed statistically improbable. Grimby had observed that over the past 6 months, several wealthy citizens had died unexpectedly from medical emergencies that were individually explainable, but collectively unsettling. Solomon's journal entry that night reflected his growing fear that time was slipping away. Judge Calverton has joined Fitzpatrick in justice, he wrote, but others are beginning to notice patterns. I must move faster even if it means greater danger. With his timeline compressed, Solomon selected his third victim only weeks later. Captain William Dandridge was a shipowner who transported enslaved people to markets across the South and personally supervised the loading of human cargo with the same care he used for cotton shipments. Dandridge posed new challenges. Unlike the others, he was generally healthy and rarely visited Dr. Hathaway, forcing Solomon to create an opportunity rather than wait for one. That opportunity emerged through Charleston's informal slave intelligence network. Kitchen slaves often shared information across households, and through these connections, Solomon learned that Captain Dandridge planned a dinner party on May 20th, 1853, for prominent shipping merchants. Such events frequently borrowed kitchen staff from other homes, and Solomon had cultivated relationships that allowed him to assist with serving the meal. Meanwhile, Grimby continued his investigation, visiting St. Michael's Cemetery and documenting burial locations and medical histories. What he uncovered threatened everything Solomon had built. The evening of May 20th marked the beginning of the end for Solomon Fairfax's carefully structured revenge. 12 influential shipping merchants gathered at Dandridge's East Bay Street mansion, giving Solomon the chance to study multiple future targets while eliminating his primary one. With help from Martha, an elderly kitchen supervisor, Solomon moved unseen among crystal and silver, listening as men casually discussed profits from human suffering. Dandridge, robust and weathered, boasted of efficient transport methods and strategies for controlling enslaved people at sea. His detached cruelty made him especially deserving in Solomon's eyes. During the final course, Solomon added the paralytic compound to Dandridge's brandy-soaked dessert. The toxin dissolved seamlessly into the alcohol, ensuring rapid absorption. Within half an hour, Dandridge felt dizzy and excused himself. He collapsed in his study as the paralysis fully took hold. His death was discovered minutes later, but unlike the previous victims, this one occurred before multiple witnesses. Physicians were summoned, and one remarked that the rigidity looked suspiciously like poisoning. Word spread quickly. By dawn, Grimby was at the mansion interviewing guests and servants. Solomon's presence at the dinner connected him to multiple deaths for the first time. The net was tightening. With 6 targets still alive and scrutiny increasing, Solomon made his most dangerous decision. He would kill multiple men at once, ensuring maximum terror even if it meant near certain capture. He identified a private meeting scheduled for June 15, 1853, where 6 major slave traders would gather after hours. Using access to gaslighting lines, Solomon planned to disperse a concentrated form of his compound through the building's air supply. That night he waited in the alley as gas lamps ignited. Within 30 minutes the building fell silent. When Solomon entered, he found 6 men frozen around a table, eyes tracking him in terror. He explained calmly what would happen next, but as he prepared to leave, footsteps echoed. Thomas Grimby entered the room, witnessing the truth. Solomon made no attempt to deny it. "They destroyed my family," he said. "This is justice." Grimby hesitated, torn between duty and understanding. When authorities arrived, Solomon stood calmly beside the table and confessed. His testimony unraveled the mystery of Charleston's deaths and exposed truths the city had long buried. The trial that followed shook Charleston, not because of doubt in his guilt, but because of what it revealed about slavery, justice, and human limits. Solomon Fairfax's story forced a society built on suffering to finally look at itself without illusion. Extended passages from Solomon's journal, along with detailed explanations of the paralytic compound, were reprinted in newspapers from Virginia to Louisiana. The account of an enslaved man who transformed his medical knowledge into a weapon of calculated revenge became a source of fear and fascination among slaveholders across the region. The medical dimensions of Solomon's crimes drew intense scrutiny from the scientific community. Dr. Hathaway, devastated to learn that his trusted assistant had used the practice as a foundation for murder, gave extensive testimony describing Solomon's deep pharmaceutical expertise and unrestricted access to rare compounds. The revelation that an enslaved man could possess such advanced understanding of chemistry and toxicology shattered long-held assumptions about intellectual inferiority and ignited heated debates over whether educating enslaved people posed a danger to the existing social order. The 6 men paralyzed in the Henderson and Associates building provided the most harrowing testimony of the trial. All survived, though the severity of their trauma varied depending on how long each remained conscious after being declared dead. Their descriptions of lying motionless while fully aware, hearing doctors pronounce death, and listening to funeral plans unfold created a visceral reality that no legal argument could fully capture. Colonel Harrison Vance, one of the survivors, described the psychological torment in chilling detail. He said he could hear everything and feel everything but could not move even an eyelid. When his wife cried over his body, he desperately wanted to reassure her that he was alive, yet he was trapped inside what appeared to be his own corpse while preparations for burial were discussed. He concluded that if Solomon Fairfax intended to show him what terror truly felt like, he had succeeded completely. The disclosure that 3 earlier victims, Colonel Fitzpatrick Judge Calverton and Captain Dandridge, had been buried alive, sparked outrage far beyond Charleston. Families throughout the South began questioning whether their own deceased relatives had truly died naturally or might have fallen victim to similar poisoning. Calls for exhumations and post-mortem examinations overwhelmed Charleston's medical community and created an atmosphere of suspicion that lingered for years. Throughout the proceedings, Solomon remained composed and articulate, expressing no regret for his actions and only sorrow that he had been unable to complete his mission against all 9 intended targets. His final statement to the court offered a chilling summary of his reasoning. He explained that he had been trained to preserve life and reduce suffering, but when society destroyed his family while calling it lawful and proper, he learned that the same knowledge used to heal could also be used to enforce justice. He asked for no mercy, stating that none had been shown to his wife and children, and requested only that the court remember he did not create the system that made such revenge inevitable. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding Solomon Fairfax guilty on all counts and sentencing him to death by hanging. The verdict surprised no one given the scale of his crimes and the perceived need to preserve order within a slaveholding society. Yet the swift conviction failed to resolve the moral questions his case raised about slavery justice and the humanity of enslaved people. Solomon was executed on October 15, 1853, before a crowd of more than 2,000 spectators who gathered to witness the death of Charleston's most infamous criminal. His final words, spoken calmly from the gallows, were recorded by Thomas Grimby and published widely throughout the South. He stated that he died knowing 9 men had felt the terror his children experienced when they were sold away from everything they loved. He said that knowledge made his death meaningful, but warned that the system producing such desperation would endure and other families would suffer as his had. When that happened, he urged readers to remember that even the most patient person has limits to what can be endured in silence. Solomon's body was buried in an unmarked grave outside Charleston city limits, in accordance with laws forbidding executed criminals from burial in consecrated ground. His journal, seized as evidence during the trial, was never returned to official custody after proceedings ended. Thomas Grimby, who had been granted access to the journal while covering the trial, had secretly made extensive copies before returning the original to the court clerk. Years later, while preparing his memoirs, Grimby chose to bury Solomon's journal beneath a magnolia tree in St. Michael's Cemetery near the graves of the men Solomon had killed. In an account written in 1889, Grimby explained his decision. He said he could not destroy the record of such deliberate revenge, yet could not allow it to inspire others toward similar acts. He hoped future generations with different views on justice and slavery might better understand the grim necessity that transformed Solomon Fairfax into both healer and killer. The discovery of Solomon's journal in 1923 during cemetery renovations, along with the revelation of fingernail scratches inside 9 coffins, provided final confirmation of a story that had long drifted into legend. The physical evidence proved Grimby's account accurate in every detail. Charleston's city government immediately classified the findings as sensitive historical material and sealed all related records. Officials cited concerns over public safety and racial tension, though many believed the true motive was protecting the reputations of prominent families whose ancestors had profited from the slave trade. The legacy of Solomon Fairfax's revenge extended far beyond Charleston. Across the antebellum South, slave owners grew increasingly suspicious of educated slaves, especially those with medical training or access to pharmaceuticals. New laws restricted enslaved people's access to books, scientific instruction, and medical knowledge, as authorities recognized education could transform oppression into resistance. The case also influenced the development of forensic medicine in the United States. The rare paralytic compound Solomon employed prompted new research into detecting unusual toxins in deceased individuals, contributing to advances in post-mortem examination methods that later proved valuable in criminal investigations. Perhaps the most profound impact of Solomon's story was its influence on the national debate over slavery itself. The realization that even seemingly obedient and loyal slaves could harbor years of suppressed rage challenged core assumptions about the institution's stability and moral justification. If a man like Solomon Fairfax, skilled, educated, and trusted, could plan and carry out such methodical vengeance, what did that reveal about the true feelings of millions of others living in bondage across the South? This story reminds us that even in the darkest chapters of American history, individual acts of resistance could shake systems that appeared unbreakable. The tale of Solomon Fairfax shows that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it simply takes a darker and more terrible form. What do you think about this story? Do you believe Solomon's actions were justified by the destruction of his family, or was his revenge another form of evil? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into America's hidden past and want more stories uncovering the truths history tried to bury, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates the complex realities beneath official narratives. Until next time, remember the past is never truly buried, it waits patiently for those brave enough to dig. The moral of this story is that systems built on cruelty and injustice eventually create consequences no amount of power can control. When human dignity is denied for too long, pain does not disappear. It transforms, often in ways that are frightening and irreversible. Solomon Fairfax's story reminds us that oppression may silence people for a time, but it also plants the seeds of resistance. And when those seeds grow, the results can shake entire societies. True justice cannot exist where humanity is stripped away, and when laws protect cruelty instead of conscience, tragedy becomes inevitable. This tale warns us that ignoring suffering does not prevent violence, it invites it, and only empathy, accountability, and fairness can stop history from repeating its darkest chapters.